And I'll start by saying I too am not 29, so don't worry, you're not alone in that story. What excites me the most about this topic is that it actually isn't about women. It's about business, it's about society, it's about politics, it's about media, it's about the very world we live in. Because until we are able to extract the maximum value of human potential that exists in every single one of us, we are leaving so much behind on the table. Whenever I start this presentation, I like to start with this quotation by one of my favorite authors. She's a Nigerian woman, by the way, name of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And her quote there is that the problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be rather than recognizing how we are. And again, I'll reiterate that yes, a lot of the research we've done here is about women, but this narrow thinking about gender limits all of us. It means that when women are ambitious or aggressive or strong, you are seen as anti-woman, or it's not particularly feminine. And at the same time for men, right? If you happen to be nurturing or considerate of others, those are seen as very anti-masculine traits. And that very narrow thinking boxes and limits all of us. So when we started this white paper, the question we wanted to answer was, as you've seen in the paper, are women better for business, right? And we looked at that across two different metrics. The one is about what it means to have women helping you manage your business, right? What is the impact women make when they are in your business? And the other one is around women as a source of growth, as a source of revenue, right? Because as much as we may try and talk around it, the reality is that in the capitalist world we live in, businesses are there to make money. The first thing I'm going to start with is women as a source of business, right? And you heard Dr. Alex earlier on refer to some of my statistics, but two of my favorite that I'll share with you are these ones. So last year, the size of the global female economy is $28 trillion, right? That is an enormous amount of money for any organization to say to themselves that actually I'm not interested, it's fine. I'm going to leave that on the table for somebody else to take advantage of. And that's last year, right? This number will continue to grow over time. What I think really narrows that argument about whether or not you're going to participate in this is the next stat. By 2028, 75% of global discretionary spend will be controlled by companies that are innovating for women. 75%. If you want to be relevant, if you want your businesses to thrive, it's not an option to decide that you're simply not going to bother with the sizable contribution that women will be making in the future. Despite these stats, and it's not rocket science, and we're not the only people who have these stats, many businesses are still not taking advantage of this opportunity, right? They're still using very dated constructs, and that's across industries, right? So I always start with alcohol, because I was there for a long time. I was a part of the problem for a long time, because that quote from Chimamanda that she mentioned earlier on impacts everybody, right? I see women in a very particular light because of the world that you've grown up in, and it takes a lot of conscious effort to get out of that. So I like to point fingers at myself first, and this is the world of alcohol, right? Women are an accessory, really, more than anything else. And often people then say to themselves, well, yes, but this must have been a long time ago, you know, we've really moved forward. And then you get an advert like this one, which launched last year.
Your world, your vodka.
I must admit, it's very disheartening when you think in in 2018, we are still making communication where women are just adornments, right? That's actually all that they're there to do, and that piece of communication is very much about the gentleman who's a prominent rapper in South Africa called AKA. However, alcohol isn't the only culprit, and women as the kind of seductress or temptress isn't the only stereotype that we're trying to break. Cleaning products, which are seen as a very wholesome category, are also a part of the problem, right? They are entrenching a very narrow view of women, and by the very exclusion of men, they are a part of the problem, right? They are saying that actually the only thing that women are interested in or should be interested in, as Michelle Obama was saying earlier on, is that of a mother or a wife who's obsessed with whether or not she can keep her family's clothes clean, and that is her world, nothing beyond that. And even in something as innocuous as insurance, right, it's easy to not realize the stereotypes you continue to entrench. But think for a moment of how insurance is advertised. More often than not, it's a man driving the car. If there is dialogue to be spoken, more often than not, it's him. More often than not, the woman is playing a very stereotyped role. She's either kind of a nagging wife or kind of a happy mother. It's very rare that you see those roles being subverted or seen differently. And this is one of the most recent ads in this category in South Africa.
Nice, isn't she?
Well, looks like a young model. Maybe 2015?
Are you guilty of taking your eyes off the road? Hello, if you drive right, we could now pay you up to 75% of your car premiums back in cash every single month. Download the Dial Direct Insurance app now and drive right to get cash back monthly. Do your thing. Get back ching.
So all these categories, and I'm sure you can think of many others, are entrenching very narrow views of women and the role we can play and what it is that we're able to do. And the reason why this is an issue is because this is how social constructs are formed. Every time your children watch these kinds of ads, and as somebody who is in the media landscape, I take accountability for it too. This is the stereotype that we're entrenching. And no, Zim is not immune. There are examples here of the same, I guess, challenges, right? I'm hoping that you've all seen both of these executions. But again, right, it's entrenching the stereotype of, you know, who pays the bills, who is able, in fact, to send money home. It really is, and as much as it may be amusing, which is great, it's limiting and entrenching the exact same stereotypes that we need to be fighting against. And all that I'm saying is that from a communication point of view, you know, when you are evaluating the work that your teams are looking at, how you are targeting women, if you choose to do so, even when you're targeting men, we need to stop looking at women through this very narrow lens of the social construct we have for them now around, you know, you're either the Madonna paradigm or you're the temptress or you're kind of this vacuous bimbo, that there's a lot more, and make sure that you are representing women for all that they are. And this reality that we need to see women as more than just this narrow lens of social construct is supported by evidence, right? Research by the J. Walter Tribe Initiative in New York, conducted globally, says that 85% of women who participated in this survey agree that the advertising world needs to catch up with the real world, because that's not who women are anymore. We are not one thing, we are not one narrative, we are not one story. There's a lot more to us. And learning how to engage and communicate with this market means really appreciating that fact. However, this is not a story about just lambasting all the people who are getting it wrong. There are indeed companies that are getting it right and embracing that women are much more than one thing and being bold enough to be a social challenger. One of my personal favorites is this.
If we show emotion, we're called dramatic. If we want to play against men, we're nuts. And if we dream of equal opportunity, delusional. When we stand for something, we're unhinged.
It's Sue Bird's gonna need to calm down.
When we're too good, there's something wrong with us. And if we get angry, we're hysterical or rational or just being crazy. But a woman running a marathon was crazy.
Officials tried to pull her off the course.
A woman boxing was crazy. A woman dunking? Crazy. Coaching an NBA team? Crazy. A woman competing in a hijab, changing her sport, landing a double cork 1080, or winning 23 Grand Slams, having a baby, and then coming back for more? Crazy, 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 and crazy. So if they want to call you crazy, fine. Show them what crazy can do.
So I'm sure many of you would have seen that in the press, particularly from conservatives, Nike's taken a lot of heat for this kind of social challenger stance that they've decided to take. Starting with the Colin Kaepernick campaign, which was about a year and a half ago, and obviously evolving to the Serena Williams and other campaigns that have come since then. And I think a big part of the reason that Nike don't care if conservatives are upset by it is this. So this is Nike's share performance over the last 5 years. My little lighter thing isn't working. And if you look specifically from when they started this kind of work around 2018 up until now, I think it's very difficult for your shareholders to have an argument with you about your work being anything really if you are able to deliver these kinds of results for them. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to make when we're talking about how do you meaningfully represent people as they are, as all that they can be, and challenge the stereotypes that exist, because it can be incredibly good for your business. And I think people often are afraid of taking that risk, but in the world we live in today, the only risky thing you can do for your business is to not take risks, to try and play it safe. That's when you are the least likely to succeed. Now, a lot of people will say that, yeah, but it's Nike, you know, they're a global brand, and, you know, they have all this like money at their disposal, and they're in a category that's really exciting and physical. But that's not the only time you can challenge stereotypes. And it doesn't always have to be this ballsy, in your face kind of, look at us and how amazing, watch us roar. It can be quiet, just like Kellogg's.
My family and I have been asked to make a Kellogg's cornflakes ad like we used to when I was growing up, where the cheerful mom brings her family breakfast. Guys, cheerful banter between siblings, perfect eating shots. Okay, so mornings have changed, but after more than 100 years, this box still manages to bring families, even like this one, together. This is my Kellogg's cornflakes family.
So for those of you who don't know, that's a South African actor called Cloma Dandela, and those are his actual 5 children, so that's his family having breakfast. And I think in a gentle way, it's not an aggressive piece of communication. It's just challenging that stereotype that we all have, that should be a mom and her 2 children, and her husband should be running in late because he's going to work and she's going to do the dishes later. Just gently challenging that stereotype that we have. So it doesn't always have to be aggressive. So obviously the question is then, what is the most impactful way to businesses to get here, right? You don't get here by accident. This is a very deliberate thing to do. And it's simpler than you think, right? Start by increasing the number of women at your business. One of the women we interviewed for this is the current CEO of African Bank, a woman called Basani. And she, the way that she articulates it was quite beautiful. That if you really want to be able to make sure you're taking the opinions and views of different people into account, ask yourself, are they sitting around the table? If you want to make sure that you are thinking about youth in your campaigns, do you have a youth voice at your table? If you want to make sure that you are creating work that is compelling for women or for whoever it might be, black people, white people, do you have that voice at your boardroom table? Because if you don't, it's going to be very hard for you to accomplish that. Which leads then to the second part, which is probably a little bit harder. How do you again get women in business, right? And actually, do they yield results? So the first point to start off with is, are there women in business? And the resounding answer from a senior leadership point of view is no. Globally, 5% of CEOs are women. In South Africa, only 7% of executive directors are women, right? That is horrifying. Really, really a horrifying statistic, especially when you think of that the vast majority of students in universities are women, right? So I can tell you in South Africa, 60% of graduates in this year's pool were women. So obviously there is something that happens, between graduating from university and the C-suite. And I know I use South Africa a lot, so it's important to make sure that this is not just for that. Zim is no different, right? My secret spy here in Zim sent me this example of the CEO roundtable that was called, and it gives you the impression that there must be no female CEOs in Zim. Clearly there are none here. And after an outcry from the public, 3 women were included in the panel, right? Because it's kind of saying, well, no, how are you having a round table to discuss, and I love the topic, you want to discuss a responsible and inclusive economy, and the only people you have there are elderly black males. There's nothing inclusive about that discussion, right? So, as I mentioned earlier on, there's this idea that 60% of women are in higher education. It's not as though there aren't enough of us there to be able to take into the next journey. But what happens? There are obviously things that prevent that from happening. And so we obviously looked at some of the research that exists around the barriers to women progressing in the professional sphere. One of the first things that came out is discrimination, right? So 45% of women believe that an employer's diversity status, regardless of what that might be, limits their career progression. And it's not a surprise, right? There is so much research in psychology that everybody wants to work with people who look like them and sound like them and think like them. It's familiarity, it's really that kind of unconscious bias at times that is very human. It takes an active effort to push against that and to employ the different and to choose differently. And it's like Andi Ratzela, who's the Deputy Auditor General of South Africa. Again, she's one of the women we interviewed for this paper. She spoke quite compellingly about how many women that she has come across in her career who actually just opt out, whether it's partnerships or corporates or senior management, and they choose these kind of non-executive roles because you get tired. Eventually you're just like, actually, I don't have to be miserable every day and be fighting against stereotypes every day, and sometimes it's just too hard, and you're like, you know what? No, actually, I'm going to go be a non-exec and stop this battle. And I think that's really important that we're addressing that, right? That we are creating an environment where diversity is actually valued and given an equal opportunity. The second is harassment. So 48% of women say they have been sexually harassed at work, and these are global stats. And as we know, these are always underrepresented. There are always people who don't talk about what's really happening. What is more horrifying for me is the 60% of working men who said they have at least seen this kind of discrimination or harassment occur. Because it means this burden of silence is not just on the women who are being harassed, it's also on the people who are around them, who are able to acknowledge that what is happening in front of them is bad. This is not okay, but do not feel for whatever reason that they can say something or do something about it, right? Which allows it to kind of perpetuate, right, and move forward. And the quote there is from one of the founders of the Me Too movement, and again, it's just a poem she wrote about the power that silence gives harassment, right? The second we can't talk about it, it thrives. And the last one is family obligations, which is the stat that 59% of women don't return to their previous career, or at least not with the same kind of vigor, once they've had children. Now, what's much more interesting for me is not just the fact that you don't return to your previous career. It's actually the things that limit you once you are back in the office that you have no control over. And it's funny because when we were doing this research and reading the anecdotes, I could immediately see how I have done the same thing. Again, I am subject to the same social constructs. We all grew up together. We know them together. Think about when a particularly difficult job comes up. Maybe it involves a lot of travel. How you automatically start to discount the women who have kids in your mind because you think to yourself, oh, she's got small kids. Maybe I shouldn't ask her to go to New York for a week, right? Maybe I should give that project to somebody else. And you're trying to be considerate, but you are limiting her. When there is a client dinner that needs to happen, similarly, you kind of automatically discount people, especially women who have kids, because you think, no, she has to get home and feed her family. There's no way she can do that. And that is a really innocuous, unconscious form of this, right? Of punishing women because they have family obligations. And Melinda Barnard, who's an anthropologist we spoke to, again, in the course of the study, talks about that if you're a woman or mom in the workplace, you're seen as having other obligations that are more important, right, as your primary focus. And it's a kind of insidious stigma that exists. And it's not always ugly. Sometimes it's with the best of intentions, but it has the same effect of limiting the career path that women have. So as I said at the beginning of this talk, the question I want to answer, is it better for business, right? And this is the question that I always love to ask, particularly the business-minded. If you knew there was something you did, that companies did, that allowed you to outperform your competitors by 147% in earnings per share, 147%, right? That is massive. We would all be getting massive bonuses if we could do that. And the simple truth is that it's just about creating an environment where employees feel engaged. If you can create an environment where your employees feel highly engaged, that is the kind of commercial success you can enjoy. The reality is that 87% of employees are not engaged at work, right? That's a huge, huge number. And in the research, it was clear that employees with female managers are more likely to be engaged. So if you're aware, there's something you can do that would drive your earnings per share exponentially, and it's about employee engagement, and you know that women are more likely to help your employees remain engaged, why would you not employ them? And let's answer that question. So how do we identify and address some of the barriers, right? I've spoken to you about the things that happen. How do you know how your organization is doing? How do you start to have that discussion in a meaningful, fact-based way with your leadership teams, right? And that's how we developed the female equation. And it's really meant to be a simple diagnostic tool that you can do within your own organizations that gives you a sense of where is it that you're getting things right and where are the things you need to work on to help really drive the agenda of women progression in your organizations. So as I said, it's a very, very simple formula, really. And the scale of measurement there, as you can see, is that under 0.3 is poor, between 0.4 and 0.6 is mediocre, and 0.7 plus is really good, right? So that's the scale of measurement. If we then take a look at each of the variables, right? So you'll see that there's 5 variables there, x1 to 5. x1 looks at the percentage of women in an organization. And again, you rate yourself 1 to 5 according to where you are there. And x2, sorry, I can see some of you can't see. x2 is the percentage of women in leadership in your organization, right? Unfortunately, those are hard stats. It's not easy to get, it's not difficult to get them, rather. The next part is a little bit more subjective. And when we ran it for a few of our clients, it's actually much easier to do a quick online survey of your employees and get the view of how they feel, right? So you ask them to rank on a scale of 1 to 5. How robust are the policies that prohibit discrimination in your organization? How impactful are the initiatives that are there to drive the progress of women in your organization? And finally, how effectively are incidences related to gender reported and resolved? And what's, I guess, funny in a dark way is one of my biggest clients, when we shared this work with him, he said, well, no, you know, on X5, we're fantastic, we're excellent because we have no incidences of gender discrimination or harassment in my organization. And I just said to him, statistically, that's impossible. It means you have an environment where people don't feel like they can. People don't feel like they can step forward and report these incidences because they don't feel like they'll be dealt with in a fair way, which is a concern. So the second you are rating yourself as a 5, please think very carefully about whether it's that people just don't feel like they can. So that's kind of the formula. And because it's fun to see things in practice, I'll show you how it works really quickly, right? So as I mentioned, X1 is really a view of the percentage of women in your organization. So for example, again, this is one of the companies that we work for, is 55. The percentage of women in leadership, which it was really easy to obtain that data from their kind of population, which was 10%. And then the other 3 variables, which were the subjective variables, right, around the quality of your policies, how impactful your initiatives are that you have inside your organization, And again, if you are ranking your initiatives as a 5, but there's only 2% of women in your leadership team, you need to think carefully about whether those initiatives are indeed impactful. And finally, around gender-based, how these issues are resolved, right? Are they resolved? And again, this was a company that we did, and they got to a 0.52. And what's helpful is that then you start to see where you are falling down. So women in leadership for this organization is an issue. Things about their policies appear to be great, but the initiatives around driving women up appear to be an issue. And finally, dealing with these issues when they're raised is not going very well. So again, that's a very practical tool, which is in the white paper, which has been effective if you choose to use it, in identifying where your issues are and deciding to progress things. To close with, because I'm always asked the question, what is the role of men in this discussion? And I actually hope that throughout this presentation, that's been quite clear, that this is not just about like things that women need to do, right? This is a commercial, societal imperative that we all need to work towards, and that includes men. And I think there are probably 3 things that men can really do to have a meaningful role in this. 1, acknowledge and drive the message amongst your peers that the empowerment of women is not the disempowerment of men. Sappi mentioned it earlier on, Michelle Obama mentioned it earlier on. This is not about disempowering men. This is about increasing the pie for all of us. This is about getting the very best of human potential from all of us and creating the best of opportunities for all of us. And that doesn't mean disempowering men. Second, men are actually key to unlocking social change, right? Not the key, we all are the key, but they have a key role to play. Because as I mentioned, it's things like media, it's the things we tell our children, it's whether you let your son wash dishes, it's whether you let your daughter take judo. It's those kinds of decisions and narratives that start very young in life that inform how we see gender as we grow up. And finally, questioning gender bias. When you don't choose to hire or promote a woman, question that decision. Is it really just about her qualifications? And similarly, if the woman in your team, and sometimes it's just one, if she is unable to find a single other woman to join that team, question her unconscious biases, because she might not be aware of it. As I mentioned to you earlier on, it took some of this research for me to realize that at times I was automatically discounting some of the women in my team with small children from going to a workshop in Paris, because I figured, well, she's not going to want to be gone from her kids for a week. Instead of asking her that question, instead of saying to her, there is this opportunity, would you like to come along? Is that something you are able to do? And I think that's the really important part, realizing that you have unconscious biases and doing something about it. So I think to really close with, it is about redressing the imbalance that we have, and I hope I've made the point that that requires a combined effort from all of us. It requires society to take a different stance on gender roles, and that's what I was talking about, our kids, that's what I was talking about, how we treat each other in a social context. Media, and again, as a part of the marketing fraternity, which is a terrible word, I'm guilty too, right? Every time we create a piece of communication that further entrenches stereotypes, we're doing the wrong thing. And we have a massive role to play in fixing that. And finally, from a business point of view, right? No one would have thought that a black female could win 23 Grand Slams until somebody did. And that's the point. There is nothing that can't be done. We just need to give people case studies an example of how it can be done. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, one thing I always forget to mention, which is really important. Yes, that's my strategy team. Very not diverse because we have no men. But all the people the women you've seen in this presentation are actually the women in my business, and that's a real source of pride for me. So thank you very much.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Refilwe, for that really insightful presentation and thoughts. We've been saying that this is a discussion and it's a conversation, and we have been sharing our thoughts with you. So we just want to take a few minutes to hear if there are any questions that you would like to ask Refilwe, or any comments at this stage before we move on to the panel, so that we can actually do that conversation and engagement we talked about. So any questions or any thoughts?
Hi, I'm Sharon Rotewa from K Media Africa. And just to add on to what you're saying, I feel that women really need to be acknowledged. And what we do at K Media is creative services. So within our services, we create narratives that can tell the woman's story, the different woman's story, and not just paint it pink and fluffify it, and that makes it for a woman. So I really like where the direction is going, and as a stereotyped person myself, I'm really excited to start projects that tell a different story. Thank you.
So, the thing that we want to eradicate is discrimination and maybe are against women, right? And then this also comes just eradicating the positive stereotypes we have towards women, right? And then my question is, as women, are you willing to accept that?
So Anita, are you asking that, is your argument that getting rid of the negative stereotypes around women involves getting rid of the positive stereotypes around women?
Yes, exactly.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
This is fun. Do you all hear me?
Very, very loud, I can. So I must admit, I have to respectfully disagree. My argument is about getting rid of stereotypes in general, full stop, for both men and women, and literally accepting the person that you see in front of you as they are. So even when you see a woman, and yes, there are some positive stereotypes that we are nurturing and caring and all those kinds of things, don't assume that. The woman that you meet, greet her where she is and find out. Perhaps she's not nurturing. Perhaps she has no interest in ever having children. Maybe all she wants is to be CEO of the IMF, and that's great. And by the same token, when you engage with men, don't assume that he's ambitious and aggressive and driven and promiscuous, which is often the assumption that is made, because he may not be. Maybe all that gentleman wants to do is have a caring career. Maybe he wants to be a nurse, or I don't know, a psychologist, and maybe actually he wants to stay home and look after his kids because that's who he is. And I think that's the point. We need to stop stereotyping completely, the good, the bad, all of it, and just take people as they are and allow them, give them the space to show up as they really are. And I think that's the point for me, right? That it's not just about women, it's about all of us not taking any stereotypes. Does that answer your question?